Are we live?
Kirk is not an attorney. This is not legal advice. This is to be considered for educational purposes only.
Good evening, folks, again. Welcome to the Kirk's Law Corner Monday Night Live with John Gentry and Christopher Hallett and our special guest, Robert Welzel. He's out of Montana. He's a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Marine Corps, AV-8B Harrier pilot, and he's also in Montana running for House of Representatives District 7. Welcome to Kirk's Law Corner Live. Robert, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. It is a pleasure for all of us here and those out there listening. This is a very special guest, folks. He is a patriot, obviously as a Marine Corps veteran, which John Gentry and I both are Marine Corps veterans. So, Hoorah Semper Fi. And you're going to hear some pretty interesting things from Robert tonight. And tell us a little bit about yourself, Robert. What do you got going on over there?
Well, I spent most of my adult life in the Marine Corps and flew Harriers and A6s and instructed in the A4. I did some time on the ground as a forward air controller in Mogadishu and in the Mediterranean. And did that for just about 25, 26 years and decided to go to the civilian airline industry and was hired by FedEx, flying initially second officer in the 727 and am now an MD-11 captain at FedEx, international wide body captain for FedEx. And during that whole process, I kind of laugh. People they don't understand when I say that I'm in my 61st house, because my father was in the Air Force and then I was in the Marine Corps. And you move around all this time. My wife and I finally decided, let's find a place to live. So we settled on Kalispell, Montana, and came here. Got a little place on a couple of acres and eventually added a few acres here and there. And all of that time and energy and experience kind of ended up leaving us with this sense that our children and grandchildren aren't going to have the same opportunity in country that we had. And we started looking at ways to make a change and a difference. Not so unlike what John did. And in our particular case, we identified our enemy, our mission as the political sphere, and became convicted that the way that we need to make change is by recruiting good candidates instead of them self-proclaiming themselves to be candidates, we wanted people to go out and find their neighbors and friends and countrymen who were willing and able to serve, and flat out recruit them. So when they asked me, I couldn't very well say no, and we started the process of running for the House of Representatives initially. And there's some reasons why I chose the House of Representatives, but we can talk about that later.
Right. I watched your video there from I can't remember what it was, just
Patriots Day one?
Yeah, that's right. Patriots Day. I watched it late last night, right before going to bed. I was amazed at what your speech is, and it's still like right in line with what we're doing, and the mindset of an American. And it's good to hear somebody else say, I'm an American. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. That's not how our founders originally set this stuff up. We are to be Americans. That's it. Straight up the middle.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's inherent in us as patriots, and in our group, We the People. There are so many patriots who are willing to stand up and demand that we return to a Republican character. And Robert, I am so excited that you are of the same mind. That we need to take our country back, and I'm so proud to see yet another Marine stand up and run for office in the great state of Montana. I am so excited about that. We're seeing that happen in other jurisdictions. Cash Jackson running on the Libertarian ticket out in Illinois, and he's much of the same mind that we are. And so that's, we're starting to see that people are starting to run for office, starting to take responsibility, and we're kind of tired of all of this corruption that's going on out there. And so I'm so excited that, that you're taking up your call and adhering to your oath to defend the Constitution. So thank you, sir.
You're quite welcome. And one of the interesting things about joining together with people like you and that seem to be a very different wheelhouse is that traditionally conservatives, at least in the last 15 or 20 years, have actually been fighting against each other. It's these little power plays for, I want to do this and I want to do that. Well, it's not either or, it's and both. In often cases, we have to do all of these things, and it's going to require people in a little bit different directions, because we wouldn't go to battle with one dimension of warfare. You have artillery, you got mortars, you got infantry, you got air, you got all these kinds of things, and they may look to the outside observer like they're working in concert with each other, but we all know, for those of us who were Marines, we all had our very defined mission, and it was different than the guy who was next to us. And our job was to do our mission, and recognize that the planners built to support together. They built the missions. They were supporting missions, and that's where I get really excited, because these things that we're doing are just critically important. I mean, we're going to lose our country if we don't.
Yeah, I just saw Billy Ellison. Fantastic voice on that man. Just beautiful vocals, and he has gone around and provided entertainment at some of the events around the country. And he said, we're going to battle, and that is exactly what this is it's a battle.
Yes.
And again, I'm so excited in the group We the People. We're going to the United States Supreme Court saying we've had enough of this crap. This has got to change. We need to restore due process. We need to be able to address grievances against our state. And this is a battle. And I love that civilians and veterans alike are coming together as Americans should, and standing up and doing their duty and fighting for our rights, because Billy is right. We are in a battle right now. Our rights have been usurped. I mean, you cannot enforce a right of due process. Our federal courts, circuit courts, district courts, they will not enforce the Constitution against bad actor state officials. They won't do it. They tell Congress, we don't care what statutes you write, we're not going to enforce it. We're going to take care of our buddies and let them do whatever they want for the people. So yeah, Billy, we're in a battle right now.
You know, there's a sense where we as Americans, and I think it's a wishful and hopeful mindset that these differences that we have between ourselves are just different points of view, that other Americans feel a different way than we do, and that you know, that represents some measure of diversity, and it's kind of a good thing. But if we study our history and we look at what's really going on in our country, we can recognize that there is actually a real enemy. It's a real enemy who has bad design. They want to usurp our Constitution. They want to overthrow our administrative branch. They want to corrupt our judicial branch. They want to destroy the education process. They want to seize the natural rights that were granted to us. And it's a somewhat concerted effort. It's actually kind of frightening. And that means that we have to be more diligent. You know, we've had the luxury of sitting on the sidelines as citizens. But what that has done is it's given our enemy, instead of targeting 330 million people, they can target 535 people, for example, or the 150 in the Montana legislature and Senate. Instead of they have a much smaller number to deal with if the rest of us won't engage. You know, I tell people all the time, I can't remember a time in my adult life politically when people didn't say, you know what we really need? We need term limits. And it just dawned on me about, I don't know, 3 years ago. I said, you know what? We have term limits. You never have to vote for an incumbent, ever.
Right.
You know. Yeah,
term limits are already in the Constitution. It's already there.
That's right. Our founding fathers, or really for the first 110 or 120 years, the norm was only one term. One term. So if we are able to restore that metric back, then my gosh, look at the benefits that we can have.
Well, the reality is all political power is inherent in the people. All of it, not some of it, not most of it, but all of it. Again, government does not exist. Government is a figment of the imagination. We are self-governed per the Declaration of Independence. Article 4, Section 4, a guaranteed Republican form of government. And the form of government is in the Constitution itself. That's it. It's not really law per se, as in law, like rights are law, but this Constitution is, without this Constitution right here, we don't have a government because it's all on paper, right? Constitutions are the internal dictates of the mind. So,
Michael Priester, he said it's hard to gauge the government when it hobbles its citizens, and that's exactly what's happening. And that's my argument in the Supreme Court is that the states are no longer Republican in character, because a basic tenet of being Republican in character is being able to address grievances against the state. Supreme Court said that back in the 1800s, and I love it that people like you, Robert, are trying to take back our government so that you can listen to the people and start bringing back the rights that are guaranteed to us in our Constitution. We need more. We need more like you and like Cash Jackson and the others that are out there, you know, knocking on the doors of Congress. Chris Hallett is beating the damn door down in the legislature saying, you know, you guys got to do something here, you know, and I'm out banging on the door of the Supreme Court and the Sixth Circuit saying, you know, let's fix this. Work with me. You know, I don't want these guys to go to jail. I don't care for justice in that way. The only thing I want is just I want these guys to start doing their job right.
Yeah.
You know, there's an interesting question in the feed on Facebook. Somebody asked, why do we get arrested for resistance? And, you know, isn't it interesting how many of our citizens are afraid? They're afraid to stand up for what they know and understand to be right. And I'll tell you, one of the things that it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I remember years ago, people used to refer to the administrative branch of the government as being the fourth branch of the government. And then there was another time when they would refer to the media as the fourth branch of the government. And they would talk about those things like those were institutions. But you know, there is a fourth branch of the government that's written into the Constitution. It's actually used a number of times, and it's the people. The people have a number of things. They have, for example, the militia is the only word that's used 3 times in the Constitution, or operative word that's used 3 times in the Constitution. There are the juries and the grand juries. And, you know, those are institutions of the people. We are inherently in charge of those things and can control those things. Yep. So one of the things that used to happen years ago that you almost never see happen now is things like jury nullification. You know, there used to be, back in the early 1900s, they used to instruct juries that your job was to be the trier of the fact and the trier of the law. In other words, the jury could say, you know what, this is an unjust law. It's not right. You know, this is not sedition if somebody stands up and says that they're against some government policy or another. And they could refuse to indict or to, they could acquit people because they were the triers of the law. Well, we have seen the judicial branch remove that language from jury instructions and in fact say, the judges will say, well, I'm the trier of the law and I tell you what the law is and all you do is determine the facts. But that's not the way our founding documents were set up, and nothing has changed that would prohibit us from exercising those rights. So I've got a friend of mine who tells me all the time, he will never convict anybody standing up for right in a court of law if he's a juror. And you know, that just becomes an issue of education and understanding.
Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry, go ahead.
The reality here is we need to get people educated. This right here, these three documents are so important. First of all, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States of America, and your individual state constitutions. Okay, those 3 things is what you need to read first before you can even begin to go into statutes, codes, rules, regulations, city ordinances, which is not law. Okay, that's supposed to codify or codify the law. Okay, that's why it's called code. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Echo. You know, this is code for us. And that's exactly what the code is it just codifies the law. So we have to realize what the law really is. And again, I'll take you right straight to American jurisprudence, volume 16, constitutional law, section 100, bills of rights, and that's plural. Bills of rights are merely declaratory of the common law, the law that is common to all. So the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment should be self-evident. That due process of law should be self-evident by now, 240 some years later. It was already self-evident in 1776. Why 240 years later are we having to sit here and argue in court our right to due process of law?
Well, here's what Robert was saying about, you know, jury nullification and that we're deprived juries today. This is the single most important redress that we the people want in the United States Supreme Court. Our federal Constitution says we have a right to a trial by jury in all criminal matters and in all civil matters exceeding $20. And our state constitutions say that we have a right to jury in civil and criminal matters, depending on the state. But most all of them guarantee that. That has been usurped. And just like you said, Robert, these judges say, "I'll tell you what the law is." No, you won't. And we're gonna try to assert that right back in the United States Supreme Court. This is let me tell you this last little piece though. This is the foundation of the case. My state constitution and many of them out there say that power is inherent in the people, and they retain at all times an unalienable, indefeasible right to reform the government in such manner as they think proper. It doesn't have to be proper. As long as we think it's proper, we can reform the government. And Chris had a great point on the last show that any right that is guaranteed to the people of one state is guaranteed to all the people of all of the states. And so we're gonna go to the United States Supreme Court, and we're gonna say, okay, we're gonna assert our right to reform our government. And the reform that we want is the reinstitution of a right to a jury trial. And we want that to be made enforceable. And that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing. At least, I mean, they still got all their crap rules and made up junk that they've put in place to take away what people can do for themselves in the courtroom. But at least with a jury, we got a fighting chance. At least we got a chance in there. With these vultures in there now, the sole intent of our courtroom is to generate billable hours for the attorney. What side or what party is the court going to side with so that the attorneys get paid the most amount of money? That's what our courtrooms are about today. And we're not going to take that anymore. And, we're going to walk into the Supreme Court and say, this is not how this country was supposed to be. And if you're not going to take this case and grant review in this case, then you're in treason against the Constitution. And now we have clear evidence that this runs to the top and that we are subject to despotism. And then we have no means to address at any level of the government. And we'll see where we go from there. I think, definitely in We the People, we're not stopping there. If the Supreme Court says no, we have other actions that we're going to work on for peaceful reform. What were you going to say, Robert? I cut you off.
No, you didn't. I love, you've brought up a couple of other issues, but I want to just so everybody can appreciate, I had to get a new pocket edition because my last one was worn out, and my Montana state constitution, and I wanted to just kind of give everybody a little bit of a break and tell them this didn't happen last week or last month. This has been going on a long time. The state of Montana, and I remember when I lived in Alaska, it was like this. The state of Montana's constitution was adopted in 1972, which is a pretty contemporary document as far as people are concerned. And one of the things that I look at that most of us would just glance over these kinds of things, and we don't recognize the impact that it has. But I know that John can speak to this. We've got a section 20 in our Article 2, the Declaration of Rights. Now, a Declaration of Rights, and in our section 20, it says about initiating proceedings, it says a grand jury shall consist of 11 persons, of whom 8 must concur to find an indictment. A grand jury shall be drawn and summoned only at the discretion and order of the district judge. That's a gross violation of the rights of the people, because a grand jury is the people's institution. And grand juries can not only indict, they can indict themselves. They can also issue indictments, and they can do their own investigations. They have enormous power for dealing with abuse of power, color of law violations, and bad actors in the government. And even as far back as 1972, there were people who were crafting documents to include state constitutions that would limit. In the state of Alaska, the most notable issue is that the state of Alaska doesn't have a sheriff. They have no sheriffs in the state of Alaska. Do you think that was an oversight? It wasn't an accident. They know that the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of a county. So they have boroughs, and I forget what it's called. But they don't have a sheriff, a constitutional sheriff. And those things are, our first president, George Washington, he said in his farewell address, he addressed what he called cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men who will who will seize the reins of power and usurp the government from the people. It was prophetic, and it's happening to us now. But it didn't happen yesterday. It's been happening for a long time.
And let me ask you if this is in your state constitution. In Tennessee, the oath that legislators take is in our state constitution, and that oath is, I do solemnly swear that I will neither propose nor assent to any law that lessens or abridges the rights of the people. So, half of these laws that they're coming up today lessen and abridge the rights of the people. And these legislators who are enacting these laws are in violation of their oath of office. I don't know if that's in Montana or how many states. I think you'll find this interesting, Robert. Thomas Jefferson said that Tennessee has the most Republican constitution and the least imperfect constitution. And Tennesseans used to brag about that back in the 1800s. That was like, yeah, we're the most Republican, the least imperfect. And now it's one of the most corrupt states and the most corrupt state governments. They've just done away with everything, and they violate their oath, and they enact these laws that grant emolument, that lessen the rights of the people. What's going on out there in Montana with that?
Well, I don't know the verbiage off the top of my head for the oath. I know it is in our Constitution. I know that many of them are about the same. And I know that the vast majority of these guys are oath breakers.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
And you know what? It's funny. We had some discussions with some legislatures at the last session. They didn't know the state constitution. They had never read it.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of not only citizens, but also legislatures and lawmakers have never read the federal constitution. Yeah. And we're not going to be able to rein them in if we don't read it ourselves. I mean, we have to read it. And yep. I remember getting into a discussion with somebody about, it was a military person, and we were discussing income taxes. And income taxes is a difficult issue, and it's very contentious in a lot of different ways. But one of the comments that he said is that we have a duty to pay the income tax. And I said, really? Where is that defined at? I said, our Declaration of Independence has one duty defined. And most people don't even, they don't even like to hear the words spoken because they're so harsh when you look at it. But our duty under the Constitution is, it's that, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them to utter despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government. That's our duty as defined by and it's the only place that that we have a duty to find. And it's interesting because we don't use this language anymore, but evinces a design is a conspiracy. That's literally what it means. That when you get government officials who conspire together to bring tyranny and despotism to the people, we have a duty to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're doing your duty, and all of the patriots that are in We the People, they're doing their duty and standing up. And I know the guys on this show and the other people that are out there running for office in other jurisdictions who are in line with our thinking. There's a lot of us, and the pendulum swings throughout history, and it has happened over and over throughout the history of our planet, that these things swing out and the corruption gets really bad, and it gets so bad, just like Thomas Jefferson said, when these long train of abuses become unbearable, then it's our duty to rise up and correct them. And unfortunately, he also said, and he recognized that people are disposed to suffer, and so they will continue to suffer until they've had enough. And I think that's where we are, by the fact of people like you out there, people like Cash Jackson, that running for office, people like us here who are doing the best that we can with the little that we have to try to educate ourselves and help educate other people out there. That pendulum has swung too far, because the corruption, Robert, they're taking kids away from people under the most ridiculous of circumstance, and they're adopting them out. For each kid in a lot of these jurisdictions is worth about $100,000 to the state if they adopt them out in Title IV incentives. And to get that $100,000, these states will incentivize social workers and give them a $3,000 bonus for every kid that they take away from the family and put into adoptive or foster care. That's a recipe for disaster, and that's what we are facing, a disaster in that area. It's happening to the elderly. There's a story. There's this beautiful person, I love her, Brenda Johnson down in Alabama. She told me this story. An elderly woman lives alone, and she had a bed sore or something minor, and she went to the hospital, and they would not let her leave. And they called in social workers, and they said, don't let her leave. And the typical process that happens with that is they make her a ward of the state, and then they take and sell all of that elderly person's property to use it to pay for nursing homes, or to pay for the attorney fees, and the guardian ad litem, and all the other leeches out there that are sucking the blood off of the people of this country. And Brenda went in there and said, now we're getting you the hell out of here. And she saved that woman's life, because that was a good ending story. Very often they get placed into a nursing home and then they die because they've lost their happiness, they've lost their ability to provide for themselves, their will to live, or they're just abused in that system. That's how bad this has gotten. There's another woman I talked to. She was in a motorcycle accident, lost her leg, and social workers came in there and said, hey, sign this paper, single mother, we're going to take care of your kids, don't worry, you'll get through this. And they tricked her, and she signed over her children, and they adopted her baby out, and she's still fighting to get custody of her children. This is a nightmare that is going on in this country right now. And it's happening.
Speaking of, is actually paying attention now. She's in the comments. Matter of fact, I was just reading a comment that she had just posted here. She's still getting harassing messages from the kidnapper in that case. So that's why I said, this,
Robert, these stories are happening everywhere, man. Everywhere this crap is going on.
And you know what? We see this, and one of the things that, Montana is in the middle of what's called the Great American Redoubt. And it's an area it's almost mythical in its nature, but it's a place where there's supposed to be all these patriots and people who are liberty-minded and whatnot. And there are a fair number of them. But I will tell you, one of the things that we learn in the Marine Corps, and why is it that we learn this in the Marine Corps? Because we don't have any of the good crap. We got all the crappy tents, we got the rusty e-tools, and yet the Marine Corps is feared around the world. And it's not because of guys like us. We're just normal guys. It's because the Marine Corps does something better than almost anything else. They task organize, to accomplish a mission. And when we sat down and started thinking about this from a political standpoint, you know, I could have easily said, hey, what we want to do is we want to win this primary. Or, you know what, I want to be a representative in the House of Representatives. Or, oh, I'd like to go be a governor. Or I want to be a senator from the state of, you know, there's all kinds of things that we do that might in and of themselves be okay things. There's not really anything wrong with them. But what we decided is our strategic vision is to restore the republic. That's what our strategic vision is. Okay. And that doesn't happen from one election. It doesn't happen from one race. It doesn't happen with one strategy. But there's nothing short of restoring the republic that makes any sense at all to any of us. So that's what we started out with. And we worked from that backwards. And
Yep.
you sit there and you say, well, what do you need? What do you need to restore the republic? And for those of us who kind of looked at the Constitution and looked at history, we asked ourselves, what is it that we need to restore the republic? Do you need a president? Probably not. Do you need a Congress? Probably not. You know, do you need a war? Definitely not. Do you need a great economy? No, you don't need that. When you start looking at all those things, you realize what you really need is you need a governor. You need, to start, one governor who's willing to stand up and fight for right. That's what you need. And so in the case of Montana, our governor comes up in 2020. And, you know, if you look around the country, you've got Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho. Montana's governor sucks. Excuse me for saying that. That's not politically correct. But you know what? You've got these governors around the country that are willing to take a stand. You know, when the BLM was going to take some land in Texas, you know, it was the lieutenant governor that showed up. But he said, absolutely not. Not 1 inch. You're not going here. And that's the kind of thing that we've got to get. I believe the only way to rein in the federal government, finally and ultimately, is for the states to start acting like states. And it's part of this idea that we have lost our republicanism. That's what's happening. And
let me jump in on that just for a second. You know, I love military commanders because you get it. You know, define the mission. You know, in Ranger School, we learn SMEAC, situation, mission, execution, administration, logistics, command and signals, and we plan our mission off of that. And military commanders like yourself, you know, you understand what's the strategic goal, and the strategic goal, I couldn't say it better. It's to return the Republican character and to reestablish the Republican principles that this country was founded on. So what do we need to get there? And this is a part that I wanted to expand. We have to come together as a people. You know, the things you said. No, we don't need a war. You know, the president isn't going to do it for us, or isn't able to do it for us. The legislators are clearly in league with the corruption and working against us. The media is going to remain silent. So what are the weapons? What are the tools? How are we going to affect this? And the only thing is by coming together as a people and putting aside our differences for the singular purpose of restoring our public. You know, guys like Cash Jackson out there, he is exactly like you, Robert. He is all about returning this country to Republican character. We need to get like-minded thinkers like this across this country at the leadership level to start working together to bring this thing home. And so, you know, I think that's one approach, is to get the leaders who are Republican minded together. The other part of it is to bring the people together. And you know, with my humble assets that I have available to do that, you know, we're pushing 10,000 people in less than a month who have said that they stand together as a people. 10,000 is, and that's just, you know, from some little old Marine, you know, that had just started a Facebook page. people in this country are hungry and they want change, and we're going to go get it. But the thing we've got to do is put aside our differences at the leadership level, find that common strategic ground of restoring the republic, bring the people together to stand behind those leaders, and we can change this country like that.
You know what's interesting about that too? You know, when you actually look into there's a term that they use around here, and I'm sure it's familiar to most of the people in the audience here. They talk about the 3%, because they said that there were 3% of the people of the population during the Revolutionary War were combatants, and that's really all it took to make a meaningful revolution during that time. And what they don't think through is that was 3% at a time based on certain communications, transportation, and weapon systems technologies. And all of that's changed dramatically. And I believe with especially with communication systems and transportation systems, you don't need anywhere near 3%. It's a concept only. I believe that, honestly, 50 people per state could make an enormous impact on the entire country. You know, you're talking now 250 people. Why? Because we can go across the country in a few hours. We can have 6 people in a teleconference with hundreds of other people in an instant. We can discuss plans and strategies. We have communications technologies that are secure and encryptable, and that's not even going into some of the other issues that are probably less unseemly. But the point is, we can make a difference, but it requires us to step up. And you know, I've heard people. I cannot. In fact, I had this discussion with somebody this weekend. I said, they said, "Well, I don't have any experience," and I said, "You mean like the experience that got us into this trouble in the first place? That experience you're talking about?" I said, "You know, you're a mom. You've got 4 kids here that you keep in line, not wild animals. They're in line and they're respectful and they're doing things." And I said, "You keep your checkbook and you keep your car clean." And I mean, all of those kinds. The maintenance of a family is not so different than the maintenance of a nation. There's very, very few things that need to be done, but they need to be done well. You know, I had somebody come up and say, "Well, you don't understand the complexities of this, that, or the other kind of legislation." I said, "You know what? There's 3 things I need to know. Is it right? Do we need it? Can we afford it?" And if it doesn't fall into those criteria,
you ask him, "Do you know what an emolument is?" And I guarantee you they probably won't, because it's a word that hasn't been spoken in, you know, especially in court and, you know, in my lifetime anyway. So,
Right.
You know, that's ironically one of the things that, you know, we talk about when we discuss the difference of, well, what is illegal versus what is unlawful, right? Because one is civil, one is criminal. And when you talk about acts that are unlawful, right, artificial advantages that give these judges the ability to usurp the law, right, and subvert the rights of the people through their practice, right? And this kind of goes into, you know, when I started, you know, working on this project, I was looking at it from the corporate perspective because, you know, the United States does have a corporation. So I said, well, in the corporation, we have these things called company assets that we have to manage, whatever they are. And come to find out, that had a word in law, and that word is emolument. And when you talk about what actually an emolument is, let's, you know, I kind of read you a segment from the Pennsylvania Constitution, because this actually says it, and it says it very well. It's actual Article 5 under their Bill of Rights. The government is or ought to be instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community, and not for the particular emolument or advantage of any single man, family, or set of men who are in part only of that community, and that the community hath an inaudible, unalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish government in such a manner as shall be by that community judged most conducive to the public weal. Now, what they're talking about is when they say a specific set of men, okay? What they were talking about back then, when they were talking about the bar members, they were talking about the esquires, the bankers, the, the elitist people, okay? So they were also talking about political parties, right? Democrats, Republicans, whoever. So when you talk about what that means, set of men, that means what is that agenda of that set of men? And that's where we end up with a lot of these problems with, we have, on the left-hand side, we have one of their favorite arguments is women's rights, and men are always going after, trying to put the glass ceiling over women and this and that and control their body, et cetera, et cetera. And on the right, it's, the opposite of that. And these political parties have positioned themselves to create arguments to where there is no bridgeable gap, right? This is an exact replica of the stuff we declared independence from. So when I said, look, after 230 years, you guys have you haven't gone forward, you've gone backwards. And when you talk about these sets of men, that also means in the control of the court, right? So when we talk about what the bar is, for example, the court was never intended to be controlled by a set of men known as the bar. The court was supposed to be an independent mechanism, right? You were only supposed to have this prosecutor guy that was only designed to prosecute bad actors. That's what he or she was supposed to do. That's it. That was your job. Now, because we found out that a lot of states are missing the mechanism that provides for the common defense as it's listed in the preamble, okay? The federal government has a Department of State or State Department. Most states don't have that. You have to go straight to the lieutenant governor. So what you guys might want to realize is your state's emoluments are being managed under the premise of what's called social control. And that is that's repugnant to our form of government, right? Because the preamble clearly states, establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility. So,
Bingo.
When we talk about the methodology or the ideology about what goes into constructing the republic, right? Again, these guys talk about the theory. I talk about the practice. For example, in my judicial report, I opened it with, it doesn't matter what the law intends if no one's practicing the law as it's written and intended, or even worse, intentionally misrepresenting the law based on the agenda of the ones who stand to benefit from it. So what that means is you talk about the perversion of the words domestic violence. The words domestic violence were intended for violence on the land, not violence in your domicile, right? So we talk about how they perverted through word salad in these ridiculous court cases, domestic violence to mean violence inside the home. That's a misrepresentation of the law. And that's where we end up with bad case precedent, right? And, so when I started to study this stuff and I said, just looking at this from the practitioner's standpoint, because, I see the world from a different angle than a lot of people do. I know where the bureaucracy is. I've worked in it through my entire career. And, for example, I know the difference between an illegal and an unlawful act. An unlawful act would be an example of a tribunal or a mock trial. That's an unlawful act. Yeah. Well, come to find out, that's what's going on all over the country through this practice of what's called guidance documents
These
right?
are not.
Agency
These
practices.
are not even mock trials anymore, Chris. It's beyond that. These are.
Yeah, oh no, I've got it right here, John.
It's where they perpetrate crimes now. It's not even. It's past a mock trial.
Yeah, no, it's the lower tribunal. They're even bold enough to use the word. I've just got it right here in front of me.
Yeah.
So, and you know, the interesting thing about that is the thought occurred to me when you talked about these groups of men. You know, one of the things in Montana's Constitution, you know, that there are some things that I find to be particularly reprehensible, but they talk about the qualifications for a judge. It says a citizen of the United States who has resided in the state 2 years immediately before taking office is eligible to the office of Supreme Court Justice or District Court Judge if admitted to the practice of law in Montana for at least 5 years prior to the date of appointment or election. And I look at that and say, you know, that's how they keep the judiciary in line.
That's an unlawful meeting. Right.
And I look at it.
Unlawful advantage, correct?
Yeah, and I had somebody point this out to me. I shamefully have to admit I have to look it up. But, you know, the first judges in the Old Testament, it listed their qualification. It says, you shall provide out of the people, able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and placing them over to be rulers of thousands, hundreds.
You know, something a lot of people don't understand is even some of these state constitutions and the statutes have changed over time, and they've been amended.
Absolutely.
They've been amended from their original intent. You know, like Arizona, to be a judge in Arizona back in 1930s, 1940s, you just had to be of sound, reasonable mind. That was it. You know, sound, reasonable mind. And now same crap you got there. You got to be a bar member, you know, so they can establish a monopoly, so they can use it to extort us and deprive us of our rights, and nobody can do anything about it. Well, we're gonna see if we can do something about it pretty damn quick here.
Actually, Texas is out against that. In Article 1, Section 26 of their Constitution, perpetuities and monopolies are contrary to the genius of a free government and shall never be allowed, nor shall the law of primogeniture or entailments ever be enforced in this state. That's significant. So, you know, it's ironic that these wolves have been pulled over our eyes for, you know, this, you know, what, 230 years, because it was just easier. Myself, I'll be the first one to admit I was guilty of this. If I ever had a problem, I wrote the report. Here, take that to legal, right? So
we talk about the courts and stuff going on here. We talk about due process of law, but there's a term that's not talked about very often, and it's called substantive due process.
Right.
Okay, so what is the right? Right? Because you have to claim that somebody trespassed the law, which is your rights, and violated one of your rights that creates the right to a cause of action. So what is the right we're talking about? Okay, well, if we're going to talk about parental rights or marital rights, those come from the law of nature, which have nothing to do with the establishment, support, or management of the government. This is why the Seventh Amendment reads the way it reads. Suits at the common law, right? So we, the people, are supposed to be self-governed, and we're supposed to take care of through substantive due process. When that right goes ding, 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 that right comes from over here, that goes over here to the common law court. That happens right here out on the street. And you find your local peers, you know, and you assemble a jury and you have a trial right here. We don't go into these private military tribunal, admiralty jurisdiction courts that are private corporations. I'll tell you that right now. You look on Dun and Bradstreet, look up your local courthouse. It'll be listed on Dun and Bradstreet as a private corporation.
So is your
So
state
they're
bar.
operating a business.
Mm-hmm.
It's a business. And they have no business messing with fundamental rights, natural rights, or even civil rights. Because
There is ideology. Contrary
right back to American jurisprudence, volume
Right.
15, Civil Rights Section 2. Natural rights and civil rights have nothing to do with the establishment, which is legislative branch, support, which is the executive branch, or management, which is the judicial branch of government. Because that's not what we instituted government for. Those are the powers that were reserved to the people per the 10th Amendment.
Correct.
Right? Whatever was not enumerated there, that's the 9th Amendment. That's reserved to the people, and those shall not be denied or disparaged. Don't make fun of me because I know this.
Right.
And I know that this is part of due process of law and what type of forum or competent court that I'm supposed to be in when it comes to depending on the right.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, that's what's missing is these common law courts.
Right.
There's a question I have for John. When you start thinking about these kind of things, because I'm an operator. I was always an operator. That's what I did in the Marine Corps. And for me, my question is, okay, this is where we're at. We're in this enormous. Well, we would have used the vulgarity, but we're in this storm, this terrible, momentous storm. How we got here is irrelevant. We're here. For us, we want to figure out how to get out of this thing, and that's where when we start defining specific strategies, the most important thing that we have is the unity of the people. When I was going to ask John, how long has this group been in existence, and how big did it get, and over what period of time?
So you're asking me about this corruption. How long did it take to get where we're at right now?
No, the people that are in your group. It's what, 6,000 or 7,000 people?
No, we're 86. We're about 8,600 right now, and that's over a 3-week period. A couple days over 3 weeks.
3 weeks. So would it be fair to say that people are interested, frustrated, discouraged? I mean, all of these kind of adjectives. People are ready. I think people are ready for this.
Absolutely. I mean, the hope that is in that group of those people, the patriotism that is in that group of people, their willingness to participate and engage and go out and bring in others and to just stand up and say no. And I want to tell you something. What's really important about that, Robert, is those people are afraid of their government. There is no doubt. I've had people contact me separately outside of Messenger and say, I'm afraid to say anything in the group. Even though it's a secret group, they'll say, I'm afraid to say something in the group because I'm afraid of retaliation by my state or county government. That's bad. When you're afraid of your government, that's tyranny. That's clear tyranny.
It sure is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me throw something in here if you don't mind. So you got almost 9,000 people in 3 weeks, and I've got this theory. I believe that part of the reason why good qualified people don't run for office isn't because they don't want to serve. It's because they don't want to run. That's the problem. Running is like a year and a half long. Your name and your family gets drugged through the dirt. If you happen to be in Alabama and you dated a younger woman 38 years ago, it might mean that you're going to get your whole life destroyed. I mean, people see that and see what the what the elite establishment will do to you if you're an outsider. And they say, I don't want anything to do with this. And who could blame them? And I realized, in the state of Montana, you have to declare, if you want to be a write-in candidate, 80 days prior to the general election. Just 80 days. Imagine a concept if across the country we did what I call write-in conventions, like 90 days prior to the general election. And you have a team of people that provide some resources, some bullet points, some talking points. Maybe somebody's printing yard signs up over here. Maybe they're making bracelets, like these bracelets whatever it is. But you have a strategy, and you go after and target some of these politicians, these arrogant, narcissistic politicians who think that they're untouchable. And you go after them with a write-in campaign and you throw them out. You know that would resonate through these elite parties. And when they start realizing that they're not safe, they're not safe anymore, you know, that we can go after them and we can get them. And I tell people, they say, well, you know, I don't want to be in politics. It's like, great, that's a good answer, because none of us do. Go, serve, do your duty, go home. You know, do a good job, go home.
Yeah, I can tell you.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I can tell you for sure, none of this panel wants to be doing this right now. We would much prefer to be living and enjoying our lives, but we have to. Unfortunately, not everybody sees it that way, and that's the problem. I think is that people are just, we won't even go out and vote. But I think we're getting to a place now that they're going to, and we proved it with the recent election of our president. You know, that people are kind of tired of this same old entrenched corruption and a government that is completely unchecked. And they stood up, and I think we're going to see it. I think we're going to see people stand up more, and I hope the people of Montana are going to stand up in your district and put a good man into office who's going to vote or stand up for restoring the republic.
And I appreciate that. You know, there's a question in the feed about law enforcement, and I think it's an important enough issue to address that we probably ought to talk about it, because people have often said that the United States, the federal government, gets away with the spending that it does because it's got fiat currency, which is true. They have a fiat currency. They just print. Well, they don't even print it anymore. They just add zeros to the deficit, and boom, money appears out of nowhere, and they fund whatever it is that they want to fund. But they've always said, go ahead.
Quantitative easing.
Yeah. And they've always said, though, that the states can't do that because they can't print their own money. But what they're missing is that the federal government is bribing the states by sending highway dollars or education dollars or all these kinds of things that are really outside the budget. But the most interesting one to me is that they send law enforcement dollars. And for years, it's been under the guise of drug demand reduction, and ironically, the biggest funding that they get is for marijuana interdiction. And I don't know why they picked marijuana, but that was the drug that was picked years and years ago. I mean, when I was in the Marine Corps still, we used to fly to the Caribbean and burn fields in the Caribbean. It's just, for some reason or another, that was the drug of choice. And they've been funneling money to the states to keep the states in line. They pay them, they bribe them. And so when you start talking about issues of law enforcement, one of the bribes that they've made with respect to law enforcement is law enforcement training. They subsidize these training programs for these local police officers, and they're militarizing. I mean, we're emerging, or we're migrating to a police state because they're using tactics that you use to train the military, not tactics that you use to train law enforcement officers. It's no longer protect and serve, and people don't realize that police have no obligation to protect the citizen. They only have an obligation to protect themselves. It goes on and on and on. So the first thing that we need to do, if we're going to rein in our police, is we need to stop this federal funding, because they're building a federal police force, which is absolutely, unconditionally unconstitutional.
I can just anticipate the argument for that, and that would be, well, we live in different times, and we face terrorist threats and these other, and so they need to learn military tactics. But that's what our National Guard is for. Although, right. I mean,
so
how fast can you get them in? It's a different topic, but
Robert, let's see if do you have something like this in your Montana Constitution? This is Idaho Constitution, Article 14 under militia, Section 6. Importation of armed forces prohibited. No armed police force or detective agency or armed body of men shall ever be brought into the state for the suppression of domestic violence except upon the application of the legislature or the executive when the legislature cannot be convened. Now,
I love how you know this stuff, Kirk. I love that.
Right. So here's the thing.
It's making me feel really badly here. Now, I have a couple of things underlined in this Constitution for Montana, but it was ones that I was looking at specifically a few months ago. And I remembered when I was looking through there and noticing that it had made several references to the militia, which I thought was interesting because I was thinking in terms of how we could use, because it identified the militia as every able-bodied citizen in the state. And I thought, I wonder if we could do civics education through the guise of the militia. There's let me tell you what, folks, we're going to have to get creative if we want to figure out how to stop this Leviathan that's been steamrolling through our liberties. And it's there's no limit. Why do we need people who are endlessly creative, endlessly thoughtful, endlessly resourceful? It's because this problem is too big for us to try to figure out ourselves. We got to take these things on one at a time. There's public access television. Most of us know about it and have thought about it, but we could take a CD of this video right here and send it to public access televisions all over the country, and they would play it. But it's got to be done by a local citizen who's going to carry it in there and give them a DVD and say, we want this on our local access channel.
It's kind of off, but I'm going to play devil's advocate with this though a little bit, because I've worked with law enforcement. I went out and spent a fair amount of time with Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, cross training with them. I worked with the FBI, bank robbery task force, and these guys in law enforcement. I have a very close friend of mine that I was in the Marine Corps with. Spent 28 years on the Las Vegas Sheriff's Department, and these guys have challenges. Especially like you get out in LA, and the drug cartels and the drug houses out there, they are fortified, man, and not just fortified with defenses, but they have technology and they have armament, and they have ammo that is superior to what law enforcement has. So, to go after some of those guys like that, they need military training.
I don't disagree with you. I made people forget that Montana is also a border state. I'm 86 miles from the Canadian border. And I remember at about, it's probably been 3 years now. They had a Canadian citizen who was apprehended on a highway with a couple 100 pounds of cocaine in his trunk. And when they put it in the paper, they eventually got to the part of the story where the man's name was mentioned, and his name was something like Juan Valdez or Sam. He was a Hispanic man. And the point that I'm trying to make is that when you have a cartel that has submarines, surface to air missiles, military trained snipers, and rapid response forces, I can assure you that they have the wherewithal to open up the northern border the day after the southern border is closed. And so I do understand that it's a very sophisticated threat, but that is one threat that I would rather fight them over there than fight them over here. And I believe that's why the federal government is negligent in its obligations under the Constitution when it fails to secure our borders. Because there's a lot of that stuff here that we may have to deal with, but we could have stopped a lot of it by not having it get here in the first place.
Right.
And so
let's get back to the heart of the problem, though. You know, the heart of the problem is the misuse of the police and the misuse of the various government agencies. And that misuse cannot occur except for what's happening in our judiciary, which is completely unchecked with no oversight whatsoever. That, in my opinion, is the problem, is the legal profession, the fraternity of judges and lawyers in collusion. You know, that's what got, you know, the surveillance on Trump was a federal judge that signed a warrant and allowed that to happen. It's the same thing that happens when children are taken. It's the same thing that happens when elderly property is taken. It's the judges that are doing this crap. And that is the heart of the problem in this country. Thomas Jefferson said it. The germ of destruction of this nation is in the power of the judiciary, and he recognized it, and I recognize it. It is the judiciary's failure to enforce the USC. It is their failure to enforce the Constitution. It is their corruption that grants these warrants. It is their corruption that takes children away. It is the judiciary. And they need some checks and balances.
The problem really is that you're partially right there with the judiciary. The fact is we're not being allowed to exercise the right to a proper trial by jury. Right back to what Robert was talking about in the beginning, is jury nullification. Hey, wait a minute. That statute is repugnant to the law.
Right. That makes it an unlawful act.
Right. So a repugnant act cannot be brought into being as all political power inherent in the people. We have the right to alter, reform, or abolish anything at any time. That is one of those times
and
that we're supposed to be there.
People just don't know.
Right. And so the other part is the bar. Okay. The bar has been a problem in history, documented, written in history, clear back to even 1215 with the Magna Carta. Okay. They didn't really figure it out here. Our founders really didn't figure that out until the very early 1800s. And I'm talking about back to the original 13th Amendment, kicking the bar out of our country, which they started ratifying that in 1809, 1810, somewhere in there. But it's in I have documentation of who did what, who ratified it when, and why the War of 1812 happened. And in 1814, they basically had killed most of our representatives in government. They set fire to our Capitol building in an attempt to destroy these records that ratified the title of Nobility Act, which is how things are supposed to be done, to bring something into being like the FBI, like the CIA, like the EPA, like the BLM, not Black Lives Matter, but Bureau of Land Management. Okay, all of those alphabet soup things are supposed to go through an Article 5 convention because they're repugnant to the Constitution and our form of government. That's standing armies, plain and simple. And we're not supposed to support that for longer than 2 years. And that's supposed to be in defense of our nation.
Right. But you're absolutely right. It is the bar that corrupts these judges, but the judges are the ones that have responsibility. And like Chris said, for them to violate the trust of the public should be doubly punished. Legal maxim, right, Chris?
Yes, it most certainly is.
Well, go right back to what we were just talking about a little bit ago about how the attorney gets in there, and you can only be a judge if you've been an attorney for 4 years, right? Okay. They infiltrate the legislative branch. They create the statutes, right? So a lot of your state representatives, whether they're Democrat or Republican, this is why I dislike both parties. So parties in general, I'm an American. I don't pick that branding. Most of them are attorneys, okay? And then from there, some go into the judicial branch. So that's how they keep everything going. And then they lie to the people in the executive branch. They teach, they go to law enforcement officers, go to.
Kurt, I think, well, I love this group, but what we've had like 3 topics that were discussed that were in some circles would take us into an argument that would kind of split everybody up and everybody get mad at each other. But we all recognize this is part of the same battle. It really is.
Yes.
So I look at it and say, you know what? We need commanders. We need somebody who's going to take this legal fight. John is unbelievable in the documents that he's written, the successes that he's had. You know, I mean, there's nothing I've seen like it in my lifetime. And, you know, you take those kinds of things and you say, man, that's exactly what we need. And then, you know, if I get, one of the things that I deal with is I want to get in, and there's two things that I'm really looking at hard to try to figure out how to do. And it doesn't matter whether I get elected or not. I want to see paralegals authorized to practice law in Montana. And you know, there's a couple of reasons why. One is that you have to get citizens need access to courts. And this billable hours thing is a problem for them. Now, that was what my thought was before I talked to John. But I look at it now as a military commander and say, you know what we really need, why we really need paralegals able to practice in all of the states is so it can attack these lawyers right where it hurts them, at their billable hours. You know, if people will go to a paralegal, they're not going to go to a lawyer, and it gets them right in the pocketbook, which is something that needs to be done. You know, I had a legislature that did a presentation, and he was talking about all of these terrible things that people in the executive branch and the judicial branch have done. And I was in the audience, and I asked him, I said, well, how many of these guys did you impeach? And they said, none. I said, you know, you guys have one weapon. You have one weapon that you were given constitutionally to deal with bad behavior. It's impeachment. And if you never use it, what good is it? You know? Right. And I'm not saying that it should be some kind of evil thing that we do. I'm just saying, if, hey, somebody is bad behavior, hey, get rid of them. And
Robert, I actually did this for Chris. Chris and I were talking, was it, I don't know, 1.5 years, 2 years ago.
Something about that, yeah.
I think it was like the first time he was going into Congress and filing with the Department of State. And I said, you know, I'm going to do this auditor's report for you. So I did auditor's compilation report, and I looked at the annual reports for 18 states judicial oversight agencies. And what I proved using their own data is that they dismiss 100% of complaints filed against legal professionals. 100%. That is a mathematical impossibility, that every single one of them is pure and white as the driven snow. It just ain't true. They're covering up. And these judicial oversight agencies, to their intentional gross negligence, are aiding and abetting rights violations that are being perpetrated by the judges. Federal courts, same crap. CNN did an article, and this one astounded me, but it was published by CNN, and they went in and dug, and I mean, you got to dig, Robert, because they don't publish this crap. But CNN put some resources into it, and they dug into the federal judiciary. 1,000 complaints a year on average, not a single judge punished. You don't know who did what. You don't know who they did it to. No names are published. What the complaint was about isn't published. These guys are operating in the dark, and they're getting away with destroying this country. And we have got to put checks and balances on our judiciary if we're going to get anything done with reform.
Well, let me ask you a question. And this is a legitimate question. I'm not being a devil advocate or anything like that. But I wonder about these things. You know, if you got a handful of citizens, just normal citizens, into the legislature, and you filed articles of impeachment with everything listed in it. I know that the rules of the House and all that other 9-yard stuff can keep that stuff secret, but I would risk getting sanctioned, and I would risk getting reprimanded by the House to put that information out. Because
that's unconstitutional, because our Constitution says that all courts shall be open. So for these guys to hide it, I think is unconstitutional.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is not an either or. I'm saying we need to do an and both. We need to make these attacks. We need to make these attacks on these judges. You know, they need to make an answer for themselves. Because if we get enough momentum in these various different areas where they're looking in a bunch of different directions, you know, every once in a while you're going to make a good shot. You know, I mean, we're going to catch one of these guys, and we're going to get it. And one of the things that I had mentioned to you guys from a book by von Clausewitz on war is that when your army is being defeated, it's very important to get a victory. The moral significance of that and mental significance for your troops is profound. And I'm saying that if we start pummeling these guys from every way in the courts, by filing administrative grievances, by articles of impeachment, by running for them in office, you know, we have in our ballot, I forgot where to bring my sample ballot down here, but on my sample ballot, judges, all they get is a block that says retain this guy. Retain him. You know, I know lifetime appointments are normal for these things, so they're not technically lifetime appointments, but the only block to check is retain. And you know, in the military, we call it information operations. You know, you do information warfare, and you start putting the word out and get people to never vote for an incumbent, never retain a judge. Listen, even good judges would understand the concept because the vast majority of them aren't good judges.
This is one of the primary redresses. My number one redress that I want the Supreme Court is an enforceable right to a jury trial. That's number one. Number two is oversight of the judiciary. And how do you have oversight of the judiciary? You return power to the people in the same manner that you return power to the people through jury trial. When you have jury trial, that's the people asserting their power to ensure tranquility and to prosecute criminal activity. That's power in the people through jury, and we learned that in the 12th century in the Magna Carta. And the same thing should happen with the judiciary. When there is a complaint filed against the judge, if these do-nothing criminal judicial oversight agencies who are aiding and abetting rights violations dismiss it as they do every single time, if that complainant had the option of saying, you know, okay, well, obviously you guys are corrupt and you can't handle the responsibility, so I'm going to go ahead and assert my right to a jury trial now, and say, okay, judicial oversight agency, screw you. Now I have the option, and I want the Supreme Court to order the states to do this, because these guys cannot do it themselves. They've proven it over and over again. I want the Supreme Court to order the states that if an agency dismisses a complaint, that complainant is immediately notified that if you do not agree with the decision, that you can request a jury to review the complaint. And if we return power to the people that way, we'll kick these guys' ass off the bench like most coaches. I guarantee it, because it'll be so easy to prove that these judges are corrupt and violating rights. It's like, I mean, they don't hide it anymore. They're like out in plain day. You know, may I speak, Your Honor? No, you may not. Well, here's what the law says, Your Honor. I don't care what the law says. I say what the law is here. You know, it's so easy to prove it because they don't even need to hide it anymore.
And here's why they get away with it. Because the reason they get away with this is because they know if the attorney opens his mouth, the judge can have him disbarred, and there's nothing he can do about it. There's no due process for an attorney. None.
And the
Right.
other side of it, and the other side of that is they couldn't do that because you would go complain in federal court, right? So,
Well, that's what I said. So because there's no real due process for the attorney, that attorney ends up being stuck with, hey, I got to do what this guy says, and I have to cower down before him, and I can't challenge him. Doesn't matter what my client's interest is. And that's a problem, because if a good actor attorney can't be a good actor attorney, what good is he, right? He has no firmness in standing the same way the prosecutor does, right? So that's why we end up with weak defenses and real piss poor arguments in court, because the attorney knows, hey, I can't go in and make constitutional arguments. If I go in and make a constitutional argument, there goes my bar card. And
Yep.
You know, that's a problem.
May I chime in here for a second? Because,
Sure.
you know, one of the things I love, John, about this group and about the ideas that you said is you talked about getting 10 people from every county in the country. Now, 10 people from every county in the country. If you start thinking about the multiplicative effect that has, that's just in the legal environment. And my campaign manager is going to he's going to have a meltdown over this, but I'm going to say it anyways. You know, we have Americans all over the country who donate and contribute enormous sums of money to two private corporations. Private corporations. It's the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And these are private corporations that not only take these donations, but they also take taxpayer funding and use it to exclude other people from the process. And it's, if for a second we stepped back and said, you know what, we're going to start taking the power away from these private corporations in the form of political parties, and we are going to direct some of those funds to, I don't know, how about private investigators? You know, if you went after one judge in every state, and I'm just using this as an example, if you went after one judge and got one private investigator to watch him and take pictures of him for about 2 weeks, you could probably get him to resign. I mean, these guys aren't just judicially corrupt. Right. They also are morally bankrupt, and they do things that are unbelievable in what they do. And that's what I mean when I talk about doing a multi-pronged attack. I mean, private investigators are relatively inexpensive. So you know, if we started collectively together with a real mission and with a real strategy to say that we're going to take our country back. And, you know, I know people right now, I know people that I could find within 15 minutes of my house that say that the only way that we're going to do this is with guns and by violence. And I reject that notion. I reject it. These guys have so many weaknesses and so many vulnerabilities. You don't have to shoot them in the face. My gosh, we can get these guys through almost anything. You know,
this is what we've talked about before. Is we should be, you know, it's 2018. We're supposed to be a civilized society here, and this is part of why I love what John Gentry's idea here is, and why we're working together on this, is because we should be able to sit down and go, look, you know. These statutes are obviously repugnant to the law. This is, in a way, depriving someone of their most fundamental rights here. We morally and ethically, we can't be doing this. And something that I've seen in that Hardwick versus County of Orange and Vreeken case, you know, this is the right to lie case. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, Robert, but part of the main quote there is any official with an IQ greater than room temperature in Alaska knows that you can't lie. Well, and part of some of the other things, the opinions in there, one of them was specifically saying, look, you know, this is like the first we've heard about this. This is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, okay? So what we have is this barrier at the first level of courts. And if people aren't, finishing off and exercising their right to due process of law fully. They don't go to the appellate court. They don't go to the Supreme Court. They don't go into the federal district court. And then when they do, statistically speaking, 97 or 98.7% of the pro se litigants that file in federal district court, they're automatically dismissed. So there again, there's that first court that we go into. So this is what I love about going under Rule 20, going straight to scope all the way to the top and say, look, here's an itemized list of everything from every state that's unconstitutional, is repugnant to the law. Here's the evidence to support this. We should be able to sit down and discuss this in a reasonable, civilized manner, and let's take care of this, because we're here to exercise our rights in mass numbers. All political powers inherent in the people. We have the right and the duty to stand up and say, no more.
That's
go ahead.
That's funny, because in the case that I'm working right now here in the state of Florida, I'm getting ready to certiorari my way into the Florida Supreme Court. But I'm also going to be continuing my work with Florida Congress. And within that reporting to Congress is I'm actually going to draft the articles of impeachment myself. So, because remember, your right of redress of government is guaranteed, right? They want you to, these bar members, they want to convince you that, oh, it's our way. You can only do our process, right? You have to use a bar attorney. Where does that say that in law? I got copies of it. I have yet to read that. So
yeah, where is that in? Claim and exercise of a right cannot be converted into a crime. Miller versus U.S.
One of the things that was interesting, there was some kind of gun safety law. I can't remember what it was, and I honestly can't remember if it was in this Congress or in the last Congress. But there was a gun safety law that came out that buried inside the language of this thing was this idea that any judge anywhere could carry a concealed weapon. It could go across state lines. It was judges need to protect themselves type thing. And I personally find it a bit repugnant, but let's just dismiss that for a second. It reminded me that we have 330 million people in this country, and the vast majority of them carry what? A smartphone. They have a smartphone. One of the things that we ought to, as citizens, be doing is not just know the names of these elected officials and people in your local area, but you ought to have their picture. And these guys ought to never have a moment, that they're not being recorded. They should be paranoid all the time, because everybody that sees them should be recording them. What are you doing to me? I'm recording you. I'm recording what you say. I'm recording what you do. I'm recording who you're messing with. And we've got, you talk about kids being taken away. That I have some experience with that. The judge was sleeping with the investigator. And, but what I'm saying is that those kinds of things should never be able to be done in secret by these public officials. Right now, we can get to these guys because we have a better weapon than they do. We've got these things, and we've already seen what happens. We've seen what happens when these guys get recorded, and they resign. How much easier is it to get rid of them than just have them leave?
Let me expand your knowledge on this, Robert, because most people don't get this far with the thinking. The problem comes from the top. The problem is our United States Supreme Court. There's no doubt in my mind the problem is our highest court. Chief Justice Roberts, I think this was a 1980 opinion. I don't remember the case name off the top of my head, but he said that it is more important to preserve false public trust. That's not a direct quote. I'm paraphrasing him. But he said it is more important to preserve false public trust than it is to bring the judiciary into disrepute and to force the recusal of a judge. And Scalia backed him up on it. Both two Supreme Court justices said it's better to preserve the public trust than to bring into question due process violations from a biased judge. That's scary. That's scary. Here's a better one, though. Justice Gorsuch. This was in the New York Times. Senator Sass had a one-on-one meeting with Justice Gorsuch. And he was asking him about, what do you think about Trump saying that a high school student could read better? What do you think about that? And Gorsuch got emotional. And he said, it disheartens me to question the integrity of the judiciary. And he said, to criticize or an attack a judge is an attack or criticism on all of the brothers and sisters who wear the robe. Now, Robert, think about that statement. An attack or criticism on any judge is an attack on all the brothers and sisters who wear the robe. Brothers and sisters is a fraternal code. And that is the heart of the problem. When you talk about brothers and sisters, that's a fraternity. And these guys believe that they're part of a fraternity. What it is it's an aristocracy. There is no doubt that we have created an aristocracy in this country who hold themselves above the law, who are not accountable to the law, who can perpetrate crimes and get away with it. That is the heart of the problem. It goes straight to the top. Our United States Supreme Court is they look at this and they say it's a brotherhood. I'm not going to put one of my brothers away because that's an attack on me now. That's a personal attack on me.
I do appreciate the fact that your filings suggest that certain judges should be disqualified right off the bat. I don't know what the ramifications are from that, but the question I have for you, and I think that this is one that I don't understand. They did the
look. Wait a minute. I got to hit this comment. Trevian just said Illinois passed a statute that you cannot mention a judge's name. These guys are in league with the legislators to protect their corruption and to hide themselves from the public view. That's another one. Actus repugnus non est frudici. No repugnant act should come into being.
Yep. Well, let me tell you this though. If one person mentions the name and they send out the National Guard and the sheriff's department and every police department to go hook this guy up and drag him into jail, then nobody else is going to speak. But if everybody mentions their name, 10% of the people in this country pay taxes. I can tell you and I wanted to hit the issue of redress of grievances. There's this problem that many of the attacks that have taken place in the Second Amendment or other amendments have actually been an attack on the First Amendment, because the First Amendment has 5 liberties built into it.
Right.
And I don't think that there has been a meaningful way to redress grievances in my entire adult life. I'm 58 years old. I don't know of any time when we could meaningfully redress grievances, when you could actually bring up an issue and have somebody take it seriously and actually try to resolve the problem. I don't know when I don't know when it exists. So we already have this problem with these kinds of things going on. And then when you bring something up that talks about a judge being disqualified for the right reasons, we had this homosexual marriage act, whatever it was called. I can't even remember all the details of it. But we had 2 justices, Sotomayor and Ginsburg, who had officiated over homosexual marriages. They should have been disqualified on their face. They were not qualified to partially find on that, rule on that. And they would not dismiss themselves. And John Roberts, who's supposed to be a Catholic and a conservative and all these other 9 yards of stuff, he wouldn't insist upon it. I bet you the discussion didn't even take place in chambers about about whether or not they were actually qualified, because they made news media reports about it in the weeks prior. So it's not like it was something that was forgotten or unknown. And they completely dismissed it and just acted as if it didn't happen. And they could never have made a partial decision when they'd already made their mind up long before they ever got in the chamber.
But here's, you mentioned the point that, everybody needs to speak up. If one man speaks up, that they haul him away. So everybody needs to speak up. Everybody's afraid, Robert. These guys out there have been subjected to the most criminal of conduct, having their kid, they're holding their kids hostage in many cases.
Yeah.
And I get away with it. I can probably guarantee you nobody speaks out against the judiciary as hard as I do. And I can get away with it. The only reason that I can get away with it is because I proved it. And it's docketed in the Sixth Circuit, in the Middle District Court, and in the United States Supreme Court. And I could not speak the way that I do against the judiciary, except for the fact that I have docketed it in the record. And bring me in front of a jury, I dare you, because when I show the jury what's going on, if they were trying to prosecute me for speaking out and asserting my right of free speech, and for standing up as a patriot, I think I could swing a jury pretty damn easy with the evidence that I've entered into the record. I think there would be no doubt. But that's the problem, Robert, is everybody's afraid, and
you know what? I don't dispute that, and I understand it too. I really do. I gotta be honest with you. I've got, and I'll show you the other one. This is the best book I have ever bought, and I've got two of them. One that's all marked up, called the Freedom Documents.
What's the title?
It's called the Freedom Documents.
What's Freedom Documents?
I can put a link on there. It's only printed like twice a year, Constitution Day and I think 4th of July. But it's got a bunch of these things in it, and one of the ones that I just love is Patrick Henry's speech. And when there's and I've read this on the air before, and I just think it's great. But he says in there, he says, "They tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be the next week or the next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed and when a British guard shall be stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by irresolution and inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our back and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall bind us hand and foot? Sir, we are not weak if we make proper use of those means which the God of nature hath placed in our power." And this speech is phenomenal.
Who wrote that? Who wrote that?
Huh? Patrick Henry. It's the "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. But when you look at the whole text of it, it is absolutely astonishing. And my point when I discuss things like that with people is that, we are weak. We will take some hits. It's not going to be simple. It takes courage to do this kind of stuff. But you know what? That's what made us Americans, is we had extraordinary courage in times when people didn't understand it. We were told it's not just the Marines. I'm convinced it was Americans that what was it? Gosh, why did I lose this thought? Uncommon courage was a common valor. Kurt, help me out. I'm dying here. But courage is in our blood. It's in our heritage. It's everything that we've done. It's just a matter of standing up. Yeah, okay. Somebody's going to say bad things about you, or they're going to call you names. I gotta tell you, when I was I did radio for a little bit, and I saw some pictures from these animals in the Middle East who had cut up the heads off of little girls, You know, they were 7 or 8-year-old little girls. They cut their heads off. And I sat there and I got on the radio and I said, my name is Robert Welzel. I live at 172 Frontier Trail. If you're not a coward, you come down and you try to cut my head off. Come on. I gave him my address. I did it over the air. I'll do it. I mean, I do it right now all the time. We have got to stand and be courageous, strong and courageous. That's our call. Because you know what? That's where we build our backbone, is through exercise and strength.
Yeah, this goes
right back to an old saying: leaders lead by example. If you lead by example, others will follow. That's just an old saying. So,
and this is one of my favorite quotes, Lyndon Johnson, and he said, "For this is what America is about: is the uncrossed desert and the unclimbed ridge. It is the star that is not reached, and the harvest sleeping in the unplowed ground. Is the world gone? We say farewell. Is a new world coming? We welcome it, and we will bend it to the hopes of man." And you know that you're exactly right. That's who Americans are. You know that what Lyndon Johnson just said there. We don't take any shit off of anybody, and we roll with the punches, and we have an unwavering hope, and you know, and what I'm fighting for, and in the words of Abraham Lincoln, is the rebirth of freedom. That's what we are fighting here for today, is the rebirth of freedom of this country, and for our Constitution.
All right, so we're down to just a couple of minutes left here, folks. Want to give a very, very awesome thank you to Robert Welzel, who is Montana USMC Lieutenant Colonel, retired, running for District 7 out of Montana. And if you're in Montana, get a hold of this man. And then we need to find more just like him that are willing to run for public office. I was going to run for public office this year, but everything happens for a reason, so I didn't. Christopher Hallett, you got any 1-minute statements here?
Just wanted to say thanks, and hope to see Robert back to join us again and give us an update on the status of his campaign, if we can help him out, help him network. Always there, glad and willing to jump out and do what I can.
Awesome.
Thank you, Chris.
Me?
Go ahead, John. What do you got? Last minute.
Hey, Robert, thank you so much for coming on tonight, man. You remind me so much of when I was a young Marine and the leaders that I gladly followed when I was in the Marine Corps. You exemplify that, sir. And thank you for once again hearing your call to duty. I pray that there are others like you out there. So, you know, God bless you. I wish you the best of luck in your race. If, you know, anybody on here from Montana in District 7, vote for this man because he's in it for the Republic. There is no doubt. Doesn't matter what party you're in. This man is an American patriot. And if I could go vote for him, I would. No doubt in my mind. And sir, you make me proud to have served. And I'm grateful for everything you're doing.
Robert, have you had a chance to talk to Christopher Hallett at all? Do you know Chris?
A little bit.
Okay. I would love to have you back on. And I would really, really like to have you listen to what Christopher Hallett how he started out, what he's been doing and accomplished, because Chris has done some pretty amazing stuff over there. And man, that's why I basically have put this all together, because the three of us together, you know, it's just, I don't know, we all have our skills and abilities, and us three together are just a magic team. And then we have Ted Fogg over there who produces all this and makes it look all fancy out here. So any last comments from you, sir?
It's an amazing new technology and capability that we can't give up. You know, I'd like to finish with something that I had in a speech on Patriots Day of this year, which was the day that the Patriots in Connecticut fired the shots heard around the world. I said, as long as we have cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men controlling the reins of government, none of our natural law rights are safe. We can't fight this defensively. We must go on the offensive and strike them at exactly the point that they are most vulnerable. Legislatures can write statutes, amend constitutions, as well as impeach. And our founding fathers understood why the legislature must be controlled by the people. We now understand that.
Amen.
World War II General Douglas MacArthur said, in war, there's no substitute for victory. There's also no substitute for victory in our fight for freedom. That means that we must act. We must act. We must recruit principled men for the legislature and then elect them into office. There's no substitute. There's no second place. And it is a fight for our lives, friends. Thank you.
Amen.
Thanks,
and that's what it all boils down to right there, folks. Getting the right people, moral and ethically sound people. I don't care if you don't want to be morally and ethically sound out there. What we need in public office as the representatives of the people, we need moral and ethically sound people. You can do what you want. That's what liberty is out there. But in order to keep things straight, we need those kind of people in there. So with that, much love, my fellow friends and family, brothers and sisters. We do love you. I love you, John, Chris. Thank you, Robert, for your service and continued service, even after being retired. And Ted Fogg, thank you, sir, for producing.
All right.
Much love, folks.
Good night, everybody.
See you Wednesday night.
You bet.
Ted can hear the music that we can't.